So let us conclude with our third hero of this trio that we're speaking of today, Sainte Marguerite Bourgeois. Sainte Marguerite Bourgeois, she's born in Troyes in 1620. So Jeanne Mance is born in 1606, Maisonneuve 1612. We saw that La Dauversière was just a little bit earlier, 97. And Marie l'Incarnation was 99, just before 1600. Marguerite Bourgeois, 1620. We'll see later on Marguerite Diouville. She comes a bit later, but another of our great saints. So I've told you a number of things already about her. She was, so in Troyes, she was very, she was close to that congregation of Notre Dame. I told you there was this convent in Troyes. The superior was Louise de Maisonneuve, the sister of Maisonneuve. So Marguerite, with another friend, Catherine Crollo, used to go a lot to see the sisters, and the superior's brother being the key man of Montreal, the sisters of Congregation Notre Dame, they wanted to go over there. But Maisonneuve says, I will not have cloistered nun in Montreal. It's too risky. You cannot have that. Plus, we don't have the means to support you. So I need active nuns. But active nuns did not exist in the church until then. It was unknown to have sisters going around. The nuns were always cloistered. Marie l'Incarnation was cloistered, although she was running a school. And so the sisters of la Congregation Notre Dame, they had a group of girls who would come to the convent. They're like a kind of an external branch, kind of a third order of that congregation. They would come for religious instruction, lessons in pedagogy, how to teach catechism. Margaret had always refused to enter this external congregation. In 1640, so she's 20 years old, during a procession of the Rosary, she knows about Canada. She wants to go. She does not know really what to do. As she's walking, here are her own words. In a procession of the Rosary in the streets of Troyes, we passed again in front of the portal of the Abbey of Notre Dame, where there was a stone image of the Virgin above the door. So there must have been, in the archway, there was a carved statue of Our Lady. When I looked up and saw it, I thought it was very beautiful, and at the same time, I found myself so touched and so changed that I no longer knew myself. And on my return to the house, everybody noticed the change, for I had been very light-hearted and well-liked by the other girls. So there's a big change. This morning I spoke to you about these actual graces that can give us a jerk forward in growing in our spiritual life. So here it was one for her. She had not entered the external Congregation of Notre Dame for fear of being seen as a bigot, as an extreme religious, extremist. But this time, immediately, she's no more human respect. She says, I want to join. So she becomes one member of that so-called external congregation. And then she gets to know the Mother Superior of the congregation, Sister Louise de Chaumédé de Maisonneuve. So it was in 1652 that she meets Maisonneuve. So no, she was, yes. And in February 53, she leaves Troyes and finally arrives in Quebec in September. When she arrives, so we're September 53. When she arrives in Quebec, there are no children because of great infant mortality. There were a few families, but children were dying very, very young. And eventually, when does she actually go to Notre Dame, to Ville-Marie? Well, on her way. She goes pretty soon. She goes to Ville-Marie. And in Ville-Marie, the same thing. First of all, there were very few women in Ville-Marie. And same thing, with very few families. See, if there was, in 53, there were less than 100 people in Ville-Marie and a handful of women. It was during one of these trips to France that Maisonneuve urged the king and his mother, Louis XIV, because he was very young then, urged to send young girls to Montreal and to Quebec. And they were the filles du roi, the daughters of the king, who were usually orphans, who were brought up in good convent school, and they were sent to Ville-Marie and to Quebec. So until these girls start coming to Ville-Marie, Marguerite Bourgeois had arrived in Ville-Marie to start a school, but there's no candidates. So for about 5 years, from 53 to 58, she will help Jeanne Mance in the Hôtel Dieu, and she will help all the men in the little colony in their various needs, sewing, cooking, all the things a good wife would do. She was very pure herself, but she became like the big sister, if you want. And that way, she got to know all the men of the colony. And all the men fell under her influence as well, because she was the big sister, and she was a saint. So, and she was helping with the wounded and whatever, sewing and housework, different things. So, which is very providential, because when les filles du roi started to come, so these beautiful young ladies would come, and at one time, I think it was Montmagny or one of the governors who made, or Tracy, who made a law that the men had to choose one of these girls within 2 weeks. They had 2 weeks to get married, to find a wife, otherwise they'd be fined. Of course, it was not always possible, but in Ville-Marie, what happened is these ladies came, and at first they were all living with Marguerite Bourgeois. That was their home. Because, well, where do we go? We're just, and I forgot to say that in 53, so some of them had come on board a ship with her and Maisonneuve in 53. So she had got to know a number of them already in the early 50s. So when others came and they were staying with her, and she had to find them husbands, it was easy because she knew all the men. He says, you, maybe that one over there, you, that one would be. She was the first matchmaking agency in Ville-Marie, was Sainte Marguerite Bourgeois. But it was Sainte Marguerite Bourgeois. So both the young ladies and the men were prepared to marriage by a saint. And there still exists in Montreal, is la ferme Maison Saint-Gabriel, the table where Marguerite Bourgeois was meeting with these couples. And they were meeting the first time, and weddings were being prepared. That's important because we're talking here about the first Canadian families. We're talking about hundreds of the first generation of families in French Canada. They were started at the School of Saints. They were prepared to marriage by saints. We have Marguerite Bourgeois. We have very holy people, Maisonneuve, Jeanne Mance, okay? And if you recall last talk on the Canadian martyrs, Saint Isaac Jogues was 2 years in Ville-Marie, from 44 to 46. So these people met another saint. These men saw this priest with no fingers saying mass with a bit of thumb, Dominus vobiscum. I'm sure they were looking at his fingers. It's like if Padre Pio sang mass, you'd be looking at his wounds. And so it was an atmosphere of holiness. In 1663, there was the famous earthquake of 1663. Our Lord complained or explained to Sister Catherine of St. Augustine that the earthquake took place, and it went from Quebec all the way to Three Rivers, and the whole province was shaken by it. The Shawinigan Falls originate from that earthquake. It's massive. Our Lord complained because the man was drunkenness and blasphemies. It's interesting how one of the great problems we have in Quebec is, as they say in French, sacré. There's these blasphemies where they use the word host, tabernacle, ciborium, chalice. They use all the words of the sacristy as swear words. Only in Quebec I have seen that. Around the whole world. In no other languages do they speak like this. No other language that I've heard of, and certainly not in France, not in Ireland, not in Spain, not in Portugal, not in Italy. Catholic countries will, when people get angry, they might use the word Jesus or Christ, but they will not use host, tabernacle, all these words. It's only in Quebec. But in 1663, our Lord complained. He said, well, the earthquake, first our Lord foretold the earthquake and explained why it was going to happen or why it happened. The drinks, drunkenness, and blasphemies. So, it is said so the earthquake hit everybody in Quebec and Three Rivers, who was already building up, everybody went to confession. But the people of Ville-Marie continued to work because the level of holiness was so great in Ville-Marie. Everybody was in a state of grace. And it's like a big monastery, really. Not surprising, being so close to the saints. Marguerite Bourgeois, in one of her trips to France, brought back a little statue of Our Lady of Bon Secours. It was given to her. It was given to her by Le Baron de Fancan, one great benefactor of Ville-Marie. And they started to build the little chapel of Notre-Dame de Bon Secours, which is the first stone building in Montreal, in the old Montreal, near the old port. So she started her school first in Montreal. This first school was in a barn, in a stable. there was the stable on the ground floor, and they had one floor where they slept. It was in a stable, no heat or whatever they had to cook. That was the first winters, must have been pretty rough. Then they start having the girls I see here. April 58, she was finally able to receive her first pupils in a stable given to her by Maisonneuve for want of something better. The building was a stone building 36 feet long by 18 wide, situated at Ville-Marie near the Hospital Saint-Joseph. So, as she's receiving girls, training girls, she says, I need help. She goes back, one of her trip to France, she goes back in 70, I think she went back before that, but in 70, no, 70, as she went back, she brought back 3 of her nieces, and so now there were 4, and they were not nuns. They were ladies teaching. They called them the ladies of the congregation. Remember, in Troyes, the convent was called the Congregation Notre-Dame. So, as it happened in many religious congregations, so she starts the work taking care of little girls, and now with the marriages taking place, girls are born, and they entrust them to St. Marguerite Bourgeois and start having more. Young ladies come, they come back from France to educate them, and they want now to establish a rule. But the problem they had, and the problem Monseigneur de Laval had with them, although they respected very much the work, the problem was it does not exist to have nuns that are not cloistered. There have been some attempts here and there, one in England, St. Vincent de Paul with St. Louise de Marillac was something similar. She was just ladies, les dames de la charité. They were ladies. It took decades before it became a congregation. So for years, Marguerite Bourgeois tried to get her group of sisters, quote unquote, lay sisters, recognized by Monseigneur de Laval, by the king. And she went back to France in 70. She wanted to see the king. When the king was out on a military expedition, she followed him wherever he went. She said, sir, please approve my group of ladies. We want to start a religious congregation. And it happened in 98. She died in 1700. It happened 2 years before her death that her congregation was finally approved. Meanwhile, they had opened schools in so many places already. Was Quebec with Three Rivers? Was Quebec? Was sur l'île d'Orléans? It was different places all over along the St. Lawrence River. She finally resigned in 1693. There was still no recognized congregation. There was a group of ladies teaching. They were living a rule, dress uniformly. But it's only, I think, when they receive a rule that and the habit was settled. They were called secular nuns. So it was on July 1st, 1698, that Monseigneur Saint-Vallier, so the successor of Bishop de Laval, approved them. They were called La Congrégation Notre-Dame, the Congregation of Notre-Dame. And from 1695, so their house, the mother house, had a chapel in 1695, thanks to another hero of Montreal, Jeanne Lebert. Jeanne Lebert, who financed that the mother house and helped her a lot. She was a recluse, like a hermit. Jeanne Lebert, another hero in the life of Ville-Marie. So the religious name of Marguerite Bourgeois was Sœur du Saint-Sacrement, Sister of the Blessed Sacrament. And finally, she died. She died in interesting circumstances, although she was in 1700, so she was not so old. She was only 80. Okay, these days is pretty respectable. But one of her sisters was dying, and Sister Marguerite Bourgeois offered her life to save the life of the other sister. And she prayed, and this is historical words, "Oh my God, why do you not take me instead, I who am useless and good for naught?" The evening of that very day, Sister Catherine was saved, and Sister Bourgeois, who was well up to that time, was taken with a high fever, and she died a few days later on January 12th. So she gave her life not only to save one of her nuns, but a younger nuns who still had probably many years to teach. So just to finish on with her, at her death in 1700, so started in 653, 5 years, just helping the men. 58, the school starts. Other ladies join. Then by 1700, there are 40 sisters. I think they have about 100 children by this time. By 1961, the community numbered 6,644 nuns, and they have 262 establishments in Canada, the United States, and Japan. And they have nearly 100,000 pupils around the world through its teaching. So, what one soul can do, how much a soul can influence others if we just let God do with us whatever He wants. It's wonderful, wonderful. And another little detail that is interesting, the cause of canonization was started in the 1860s. As you know, they do the various inquiries at a different level, different places where the person lived. They gather everything. And the first step is to recognize the heroicity of the virtues. Did she practice faith, hope, charity, prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, and all the other moral virtues at a heroic degree? That's the question. And who approved this decree of heroic virtues? St. Pius X in 1908. So our patron saint knew about Canada. Yeah, and of course he knew about Canada, but he did not beatify too many people. He canonized, St. Pius X canonized, I think 4 or 10 saints in 11 years. He beatified a few more. He declared venerable more, and one of them was St. Marguerite Bourgeois. Interesting. So there we are. We've seen the Foundation of Montreal with these great people who were led by divine providence for this foundation. And we wonder at times when we see, this mystical era, 1633 to 1660, that was the highlight. A lot of hardships, but great heroes, heaven intervening. After that, kind of dwindling down. There was a moment, like in the 1670s, where Maisonneuve was dead, Jeanne Mance was dead, a lot of the pioneers of the 1640s were dead, and it is Marguerite Bourgeois, Sister Marguerite Bourgeois, who was there to revive the original spirit of Ville-Marie. More than the priest, it was these nuns. And so she's certainly, if not the foundress, one of the key souls in the early history of Canadian history. Next time, I think we will talk about Monseigneur de Laval, François de Montmorency Laval, first bishop, not just of Quebec, but of all of French Canada, and his diocese went all the way down to Louisiana. So, where he never went, because there was nobody there really. But Monseigneur François de Montmorency Laval. We talk about him. Others I would like to talk about is Saint Catherine Tekakwitha. She went to one of the schools of Marguerite Bourgeois. Marguerite Bourgeois must have met her because Kanawake, which is just outside of Montreal, Cocknawaga, which is near Pont-Mercier. If you go to Montreal, you take Pont-Mercier, just near the airport of Dorval, on the south side of the St. Lawrence. That's where she lived. That's where her body is. If ever you go to Montreal, then that's a place to visit. Okay, we have said Mass there in the church. Even the Sisters of Messina came, have a sung Mass one day in Messina. It was very good. The tomb of St. Catherine is right there, the altar. So we'll speak about her. I would like to talk about St. Margaret Duville with the Grey Nuns. A little bit the Grey story, the nuns of the Grey, the story of the Grey Nuns, and who went also to the North Pole. Incredible. The first nuns in the North Pole. Then that'll be the 1700s. Then we'll see, that's the next three will be Monseigneur de Laval, Catherine Tekakwitha. We need to talk about Catherine of St. Augustine a little bit. Marguerite Duville. And then we move on a little bit further in our history. I'd like to talk about, we're leaving the 17th century, talk about Monseigneur Bourgeois, one of the bishops, the second bishop of Montreal, and some of the more modern stories. Perhaps give a talk on the foundation of Ottawa, the Diocese of Ottawa, Bishop Guigues, and the OMI fathers, because it goes very close. It's Bishop Bourgeois of Montreal who called the OMI to Montreal in 1841. And one of the first to come, not the first, but about 2-3 years later, the OMI from France appointed a priest who would be the superior of the OMI in the whole Quebec, French Canada. And that was Father Guigues, who was the first bishop of Ottawa, became bishop later on, and 1847, and from there they start going west, and St. Boniface in Manitoba, and then north, and to the conquest. So we need to talk about the OMI, the missionaries, and so on. And if you have any topic on Canadian history you would like me to address, please let me know. I'll see if I have some information. I'll read it up, prepare it for you. Thank you very much.